The millionaire's autistic son wouldn't talk to anyone, but the waitress did something that changed him. They entered the dining room like a storm dressed in silence, Lucas Harrow in a dark suit cut to his ankles, and the boy beside him, 8 years old, shoulders high, eyes flitting along the ceiling as if the lights were loud. Crystal chimed, cutlery shone, and the kind of money that turns rooms into stages hummed beneath conversations about deals and donors. Lucas owned the tallest building on the harbor and the software that lived inside half the phones in the city. He knew how to make noise that moved markets, but tonight he was here to make none at all. Mr. Harrow, purred the maitre d', lips polished with deference. Table 12 is prepared, just as you requested. Lucas nodded. Corner. Low traffic. His hand hovered, then withdrew from the boy's shoulder. Evan doesn't like crowds. Evan's fingers fluttered against his thighs, then anchored to the edge of the linen tablecloth, rubbing the seam until the thread offered him a rhythm. He did not look at the maitre d'. He did not look at his father. He looked at the chandelier and flinched when it glittered. Mara Delaney had already seen them from the service station. She noticed how Lucas kept his voice flat to keep the world flat with it. She noticed how the boy mapped exits, vents, the fan of spoons. Mara had learned to read rooms the way other people read menus. She worked double shifts at Linden and Pine, the kind of restaurant where men like Lucas ordered wine that cost a month of rent and tipped like they were paying to forgive themselves. She was 26, wore a thrifted blouse beneath her apron, and made rent by knowing how to see what men like Lucas didn't show. Her life could be filed under rich man, poor woman, and yet she carried herself with the kind of dignity money couldn't buy. Table 12, Mara, the manager, Dorian, murmured, just a little too close. VIP, no chatter. In, out, perfect. We keep Harrow. We keep the foundation gala. You understand? I always do, she said, and picked up 2 menus. She approached without perfume, without suddenness. Some people entered a table like a trumpet. Mara arrived like a hand-smoothing paper. Good evening, she said, setting down glasses without clink. I'm Mara. If you need quieter, I can dim the table lamp. Lucas looked up, one heartbeat late, as if he was returning from a place where worry lived. Thank you, he said. Evan pulled his knees up to the chair and pressed his palms over his ears. Mara didn't speak to him. She knelt so the lamp reflected off neither crystal nor eyes, and tilted the shade until the bulb drew a smaller circle on the cloth. She slid the basket of bread 2 inches left, so the texture wouldn't fray his fingers. When Evan's gaze caught on the knife's shimmer, she traded it for a matte butter spreader without comment. Sparkling or still? She asked. Still, Lucas said. No ice, Mara poured quietly. Evan rocked once, twice. His breath came staccato, the way a machine might breathe if it had learned from a metronome. Mara's brother had breathed like that when he was small and the world grated. She remembered the summer they communicated by tapping the table with 2 fingers, a language none of their teachers respected because it wasn't loud. Her brother had taught her that communication was more than words and more than performance. It was the bridge you built to where the other person already stood. Would you like the children's menu? She asked, still speaking to Lucas but watching Evan's hands. No, Lucas said, a flash of something like pride or guilt. I'll have what I have. Evan's heel knocked the chair leg. The chandelier tinkled. He recoiled as if the sound had teeth. Mara rose, invisible alarm loud in her chest. We have a visual menu, she said gently. Photos of each dish. Help some people decide faster, less pressure. Lucas's eyes sharpened. He was accustomed to decisions that assumed other people's needs. He was not accustomed to kindness that suggested his son was allowed to have any. We'll take it, he said. Dorian's stare burned from the host stand. Don't improvise. Mara ignored it. She returned with a ring of laminated cards bound by a soft clip. The staff kept them for tourists who didn't speak English and guests who did but needed different words. She laid the cards in a row and removed the clip with a sound no louder than a breath. Evan's fingers stopped mid-flutter. Mara placed 3 cards ahead of him, not directly in front, adjacent like an invitation. Roast chicken, mushroom risotto, blueberries. She didn't know why she'd slipped the last card from the dessert set. Maybe because the color was a gentler blue than the chandelier's cold spark. The boy glanced down. The eyes that had ricocheted off glass and noise settled on the round indigo scatter. Blue, Mara said softly, not as a question, not as a demand, Just a word lowered to the floor where he stood. Evan's lips parted. He exhaled through his nose. His right hand lifted, then dropped. He tapped the table once, same tempo he'd used to rub the seam. Mara tapped once, the same rhythm, her fingertips barely kissing the cloth. Lucas's shoulders flinched. 1,000 rooms, 1,000 board meetings, and never had he seen someone mirror the pattern without making it a performance. He didn't move. He watched as if stillness were the only way not to spook a chance. Evan tapped again, 2 beats. Mara answered 2 beats. Evan's breathing steadied. His hand hovered over the blueberries card, then landed. He slid it, haltingly, intent toward Mara. She'll bring blueberries, she told the heir more than the father, because the moment belonged to the boy. Blueberries, Lucas repeated, the word foreign and holy in his mouth. Dorian appeared at Mara's elbow, smile iced for the room. A word, he breathed between teeth that didn't move. He pulled her 2 steps away. You're not a therapist. No, Mara said. I'm a waitress. Then wait tables, he hissed. No props. No special orders. He's not our problem. Harrow is. Don't make this about you being noble. Mara didn't flinch. It's about him eating. Keep it simple, Delaney, Dorian warned. Don't embarrass the house. She returned to the table before her temper made a sound it would regret. She crouched eye level with Evan, parallel, not face on, and placed a small porcelain bowl at the edge of his space. It held exactly 10 blueberries. Small numbers calmed. For you, she said to the cloth. Evan extended one finger, paused, then pressed it into the bowl, rolling a berry between finger and thumb. He did not put it in his mouth. He lined them up, one by one, like planets he could command into order. Lucas watched him as if the child were a new planet he'd never let himself name. His jaw worked, a muscle at war with memory. He doesn't use menus, he said. The confession and apology for all the times he'd forced the boy to speak a language that wasn't his. He doesn't talk to anyone. Maybe he doesn't need to talk to be heard, Mara said. Lucas looked at her properly for the first time. She had brown eyes that chose softness without mistaking it for weakness. The kind of face that made people tell the truth because it didn't punish them for it. She did not smile like a candidate. She did not flinch like an applicant. She existed with a steadiness that felt like shelter. Thank you, he said. It surprised him how much it cost. A woman swept into the dining room in a dress that would rather be photographed than sat in. She was younger than Lucas by a decade and wore a ring that wanted to be older. Sloane Davenport, fashion publicist, rumor magnate, the city's favorite foregone conclusion. She did not see Evan. She saw Harrow's profile and moved toward it like a yacht to harbor. Lucas, she chimed, placing a hand too near his tie, too near the space a father keeps for his son. You disappeared after the charity shoot. I left messages. Evan's shoulders peaked. The chandelier chimed again. He pressed his palms to his ears hard enough to turn the skin pale. Lucas didn't stand. Sloane, we're having dinner. We? Her gaze flicked to Mara and dismissed her the way people dismiss chairs. Oh, a family night. Mara rose without bristling. I'll give you a minute, she said, collecting the laminated ring in one motion. She left the blueberries. She left the rhythm. Sloane leaned in. I have Vogue tomorrow. They asked about the gala. I told them your son is a private matter, and the city applauds your strength. Evan rocked. The word son hovered in the air like a drone. He knocked the bowl. Blueberries scattered across the tablecloth and dropped one by one with tiny, traitorous thuds. Sloane recoiled. Oh, Lucas reached too slow. He had built an empire out of frictionless speed. He was never fast enough for this. Mara was already there with a napkin, not bustling, not correcting, just arriving on the floor at eye level again, gathering the blue moons into the bowl with palms open so her hands didn't become walls. It's okay, she said, but to the berries, not to the boy, so he didn't have to carry the instruction. She placed the bowl farther from the edge and slid a second card into Evan's orbit. More Evan stilled. He focused on the white square, on the plain black word. His fingers hovered over the space between bowl and card, as if trying to balance on a tightrope made of ink. He looked at Mara's hands, then at his own. Show me, she whispered, not as a command, as permission. You can tell me with that. His index finger descended. He tapped the card once. He tapped the rim of the bowl once. He tapped the table once. The metronome of a choice. Lucas forgot to breathe. Mara's throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. More blueberries, she said to the air. Dorian appeared again, a scold hidden in a smile. Delaney, the special is the sea bass. Sell it. Mara didn't look up. More blueberries, please, she told him, still kneeling. And for a second, Dorian looked like a man asked to swim. Sloane's gaze slid between Mara and Lucas with the calculation of someone who believed affection was a currency to be traded. Is this what we're doing now? She said lightly. True love stories in the dining room? You feeding narratives to make the investors cry? Lucas's head snapped toward her. His voice was quiet. We're feeding my son. Sloane's laugh was small and sharp. You could do that at home. He doesn't eat at home, Lucas said, and for a breath the room leaned into a truth it wasn't designed to hold. The runner brought another bowl. Mara set it down and slid the more card closer. Evan pressed it toward her. He met no one's eyes. He did not have to. The room shrank to the size of a word. When she stood, Mara felt Lucas's gaze follow her like heat follows a match near paper. Not hungry, not predatory, something more like recognition. She had not saved anyone. She had simply refused to make the boy do all the work of being understood. Thank you, Lucas said again, and this time it sounded like surrender. Dorian stepped in once more, smile lacquered thin. Mara, a word now. He led her to the hallway by the restrooms where the wallpaper pretended to be art. You're performing. The Harrow account is delicate. You don't touch the child. You don't kneel. You don't improvise therapy. One complaint from Ms. Davenport and I'll replace you by dessert. Mara stared at the pattern, little gold leaves repeating until they weren't leaves anymore. If kindness looks like performance to you, she said, you're selling the wrong show. Last warning, he said, and walked away. She returned to table 12 to find Evan tracing circles around the blueberries with his finger, as if orbiting a small planet he could bear to live on. Lucas's tie was loosened half an inch, and it looked like a confession. Sloane had vanished to the bar where cameras liked to feed. Mara placed the check presenter down, though no one had asked for it yet. She slipped a plain square card inside, blank on one side, a quiet grid of picture symbols on the other. The kind she made at home for her brother years ago and kept in her bag out of habit. You can keep this, she said, if you want. Lucas touched the edge of the card, the way a drowning man might test the surface of the water for a place to breathe. Who are you? He asked, but it wasn't the question he meant. Evan lifted his head. For the first time since he'd entered, he looked at Mara, not through her, not past her, but at her. His lips moved around air he didn't owe anyone. A sound formed, soft, almost colorless, but alive. He shaped. And then he pressed the more card with his whole palm, as if to tell the room that whatever this was, he wanted it to continue. The restaurant exhaled when they left, as if the room itself had been holding its breath around them. Outside rain stitched the harbor lights into soft lines. Lucas held the umbrella too high, forgetting he was taller than grief. Evan walked just beside him, steps clipped and careful, clutching the small picture card set like a passport he wasn't sure would be honored anywhere else. Mara handed over a paper bag before they reached the curb. Blueberries for the road, she said, and a copy of the grid. She'd taken a photo on her phone, printed it at the host stand while Dorian fumed, and slipped it into a plastic sleeve. If he chooses to use it. Lucas took the bag. The way he said thank you made it sound like he hadn't said the words in years, and was trying to remember how they fit in his mouth. He chose, she said simply. He looked at her, rain freckling his lashes. He seemed about to ask something impossible, like how you rebuild a house without the blueprints. Instead, he said, "Do you work every night?" "Most," she replied, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. Laurent prefers consistency. He tried on a smile that didn't belong to his public face. "Then I suppose I'll pretend to like sea bass." A sleek black car slid to the curb. The driver leaped out to open the door. The umbrella tilted. Light skated across the water like loose change. Evan tugged his father's sleeve once sharply, a signal, not a plea. He touched the more symbol with 2 fingers, as if to imprint it on his skin. "More," he said barely, and Lucas's throat tightened so fast he had to cough to cover the sound. It wasn't a sentence. It wasn't meant for anyone, but the space between his son and a world that never made enough sense. But still, it was a word chosen and released. Mara stepped back because some moments are private even when they happen in public. "Good night, Evan," she said, speaking to the air near his shoulder. He flicked his fingers in a small, precise motion. Not a wave exactly, a permission to end the scene. They drove away, taillights bleeding into the rain, and Mara stood a little longer under the awning, letting the storm do its small work of washing the day clean. When she went back inside, Dorian was waiting with a ledger and a look. "You created a liability," he said, as if accusing her of lighting a match in a storeroom. "I created a customer who will return," she replied, moving past him toward the service station. "You're not paid to innovate." "No," Mara said, gathering napkins. "I'm paid to notice." He opened his mouth, then shut it. There are some arguments that can't be won without tearing something essential. Lucas lived in a house made of glass for the views and code for the company. The foyer's white echoed, clean and cool. The kitchen hummed with stainless resignation. He'd hired an educator, 2 therapists, and a chef whose food was art and therefore inedible. None of them had returned a single word to his son. He laid the blueberries on the counter, as if presenting evidence to a court that had never ruled in his favor. "It was a waitress," he said aloud, absurdity and wonder twined. She made it make sense. Evan hopped twice in the doorway. The sound was the geography of his comfort. He placed the picture grid on the island, smoothed it with his palm, and then, deliberate as dawn, pressed the square for blueberries. Lucas swallowed. His hands shook when he opened the bag. He poured 10 berries like a ritual. The boy made a small sound, approval maybe. Lucas stepped back so his shadow wouldn't touch the grid. Bridget, the night caregiver, watched from the hall. She'd lasted longer than most. "He seems calmer," she said softly. "I think someone gave him a bridge," Lucas murmured. "And told him he didn't have to swim." Bridget nodded, eyes kind. "Maybe he just met someone who listens in his frequency." Lucas turned the words over. Listen, frequency. He'd spent a decade bending signals to his will, optimizing packets, teaching machines to predict what humans wanted before they knew they wanted it. But he had never considered the simplest protocol: wait, watch, respond in kind. His phone lit the countertop, a message from Sloan. "Press like the photo of you two at Linden and Pine. Narrative works. Keep leaning into devoted father. Call me before I lock the Vogue quote." He stared until the screen went dark. Then he put the phone upside down and watched his son roll 2 blueberries into orbit. Those worlds did not require an audience. Mara walked home through a neighborhood the city preferred not to post about. The laundromat was still open, throwing rectangles of fluorescent honesty onto the sidewalk. Her little apartment smelled faintly of peppermint and old textbooks. On the fridge, a photo of her and her brother Jamie both squinting into sun at a county fair. Beneath, a magnet with a strip of icons she'd made for him when the school refused to fund the communication device he needed. He'd learned to line up the icons like a sentence, and she'd learned to call out the language of possibility in places that had forgotten it existed. Jamie lived across town now, with a roommate and a schedule, working mornings at a plant nursery where leaves behaved predictably. He texted her pictures of stubborn buds and wrote captions in the clipped poetry of someone who'd made friends with patience. "Red leaf good today." Boss liked soil. Rain is soft. She microwaved soup, sat at the tiny table, and sketched a new grid in the margin of an unpaid bill. Feelings this time. Tired, loud, okay, more, stop. She wasn't sure why she was doing it. Maybe because blank space irritated her. Maybe because the boy's face at the table had lodged behind her ribs. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again, same number. She answered. "Ms. Delaney?" A male voice clipped by habit. "It's Lucas Harrow. My assistant found your number on the receipt." "Did I forget to charge you for blueberries?" she asked, dry as the sidewalk a beat. Then, to his credit, a small laugh. "No, I wanted to ask where you got the picture grid and if you'd be willing to show us how to use it properly." She could hear the effort it took for pride to make room for humility. She thought about Dorian's threat, about rent, about the 100 ways this could turn into a story she didn't want to be in. She also thought about a boy who had lined up planets and found a way to ask the universe for more. "I can meet you before my shift tomorrow," she said. "Bring coffee and a notebook." "Done," he said too quickly, as if the door might swing shut if he didn't wedge a foot in it. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." "Right." He cleared his throat. "Good night, Miss Delaney." "Mara," she said, because names are cheaper and worth more. The next morning, Linden and Pine was a cavern of polished intention. silverware aligned like a promise, chairs shouldering their angles. Lucas arrived before the first reservation with Evan and a leather folder that looked like it wanted to negotiate. Evan wore noise-canceling headphones that made him look like a small pilot landing in weather. Mara was already there, sleeves rolled, steaming cups lined like soldiers beside a stack of laminated squares she'd cut between bus runs. "Start with choices," she said, sliding 2 icons in front of Evan. "Sit by window, sit in corner." 2 is enough. Evan glanced, then pressed window without looking at them. Lucas started toward the table by the glass. Mara placed a hand, light present, on the back of a chair. "Wait, let him lead." Lucas nodded, stepping aside. Evan walked to the window seat and tapped the chair twice, same tempo as last night's table. Lucas pulled it out. Evan climbed up, settled, and pressed more. He tapped the empty table. "Not blueberries." "Not this time. More what?" Lucas asked. Mara slid 2 more icons, lights down, music down. Evan pressed music down and covered his ears. Lucas looked toward the ceiling speakers, as if they were guilty. "Can we?" Mara called to the bartender setting up the well. "Daniel, drop house volume 2 notches." Daniel obliged with a thumbs up. Evan's shoulders lowered 1/2 inch, a victory measured in fractions. "You're good at this," Lucas said to her quietly. "I'm practiced," she said. "Good belongs to him." Evan pressed OK and then, after a delay that felt like a sunrise thinking about it, touched hello. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. The word lived in the square, and the meaning lived in his eyes when he turned them toward Mara for a breath. Lucas made a sound like a laugh, trying to escape a cage. Sloane's reflection appeared in the window before she did, lips glossed, eyes assessing. "Well," she said, stepping inside as if called. "Am I interrupting another performance?" Mara didn't stand. "We're busy," she said, tone polite enough to pass inspection, steel enough to stand. Sloane's smile cut. "Lucas, darling, Vogue wants you at 8. The photographer thinks the headphones are iconic." "They'll scream devoted." Evan flinched at scream. He pressed stop with 2 firm taps, then hissed a little low sound that was all self-defense and no malice. "Don't use that word," Lucas said, too calm. He placed the stop card in front of Sloane as if to translate. "We're not selling this." "You're always selling," Sloane replied, the pity sweet of a practiced insult. "You just changed the product." Mara gathered the icons into a neat row and spoke to Lucas without looking at Sloane. "Consistency matters. If you change plans, warn him. If you need to leave, give a countdown, 5, then 3, then 1. His nervous system doesn't like surprise." Sloane rolled her eyes. "His nervous system doesn't like people. He likes people who don't make him do all the work," Mara said, and slid more toward Evan. He pressed it. Then haltingly he tapped his chest, and then the icon for hello. His mouth shaped the ghost of a word. It broke apart. He breathed. Lucas bent, slow, careful. He pressed his palm to the table, mirroring the pattern from last night. "Hello," he said, but to the wood, not to the boy, so the boy could pick it up without the weight of expectation. Evan touched the card again. Effort, a fragment like a shard of colored glass catching light. Lo, Mara didn't move. She wanted to cry. She wanted to not frighten the moment away. "Hi, Evan," she whispered. "I see you." Sloane's smile thinned until it was almost a line. Cameras didn't know what to do with progress that wasn't photogenic. "You can't keep her," she told Lucas. "She's a waitress. The optics are complicated." Lucas straightened, a slow tide reversing. "I'm not keeping anyone," he said. "I'm learning." The manager's shadow cut the edge of the scene. Dorian cleared his throat, deciding which master to feed. He smiled at Sloane. "We're honored to host the Vogue team this evening. Shall I reserve the private room?" "Perfect," Sloane cooed. "Lucas will bring the boy." "Authenticity plays, Noe," Lucas said. Sloane blinked. "Excuse me?" "He's not a prop," Lucas said. "He's my son." Dorian paled at the tone you can't buy. He pivoted toward Mara with long-delayed menace. "Mara, office now!" She looked at Evan. He had pressed stop again and had begun to rock, small and controlled. Mara slid okay. He touched it. She stood. "Make it quick," Lucas told Dorian, not loud, but with the authority of someone who has finally decided which kind of power he wants to use. In the office, Dorian closed the door carefully, as if noise might stain the mahogany. "You don't decide the terms of service here," he said. pointing to the schedule pinned by a brass thumbtack. "You work a double tonight, and you avoid that table." "I won't have you helping," she said. "Overstepping," he corrected. "Miss Davenport is a patron." "You embarrassed her." Mara stared at the schedule, the neat columns that had become her life's calendar. "Fire me if you need to," she said. "But don't ask me to choose optics over a child." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "This place runs on patrons. It runs on people," she said, hand on the doorknob. "You just price some of them higher." She returned to find the picture grid rearranged into something new. Evan had put hello beside okay, and then slid more underneath like a sentence that was trying to grow legs. Lucas looked up at her with something like awe and something like fear, because once you see a bridge, you can never pretend the river is uncrossable again. Outside, the harbor brightened, and the chandelier's glint softened to something almost kind. Evan tapped the table twice, the old rhythm evolving. He pushed an icon toward Mara's side of the table this time, offering her the language she'd offered him. It was stay. Mara did not sit. She never did when emotions felt too big for chairs. "He wants you to stay," she said, voice careful, but steady. Lucas's throat worked around the words he wasn't sure he deserved. Stay, a concept he'd paid for in loyalty contracts and prenups, but never in sincerity. "He doesn't," his voice cracked once, then recovered. "He doesn't usually want anything from me." Mara looked at the boy, then back at him. "He doesn't want things, Mr. Harrow. He wants connection." Lucas sank into the chair opposite Evan, his face unguarded in a way that would have shocked his board. He set his phone on the table, screen down. "Then I'll learn." Evan tapped his fingers once, a soft echo of their first rhythm. He pressed OK, then slid stay toward Mara again, this time slower, deliberate. His small smile flickered and vanished, as if joy were a wild animal that needed permission to exist. "You have a good teacher," Mara said gently, meeting his gaze. "Two of them, actually," Lucas exhaled. "You think I can learn that easily?" "I think he's been teaching you since the day he was born," she said. "You just never had a translator." For the first time, Lucas didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a father who had just realized how much of his child's life had gone unseen. By evening, Sloane was gone, and the restaurant's rhythm settled. The air felt less expensive. Dorian hovered, anxious, but stayed silent, the kind of silence born of knowing he had lost control of the story unfolding in his dining room. Evan sat quietly, working with the icons. Mara had added music, window, and outside. He pressed outside twice. "You want to go out?" Lucas asked. The boy tapped OK. They stepped into the soft light of the harbor terrace, empty now except for candles flickering like tired hearts. The city reflected off the water in gold and glass, the sound of rain lingering only in memory. Evan stood by the railing. The world was vast and unfiltered, but tonight he didn't flinch. His hand drifted toward the sea breeze, fingers moving through invisible strings only he could hear. "What's he doing?" Lucas whispered. "Listening," Mara said. "People like Evan notice everything the rest of us forget." The wind, the hum, the rhythm of lights. Lucas watched his son, his quiet, unreachable son, stand under the glow of the lamps like a small piece of the world finally fitting into place. "I've spent 8 years trying to make him speak," he said. "Turns out he's been talking the whole time." Mara smiled softly. "He just needed someone who spoke silence." Lucas turned to her. "How did you know what to do?" She hesitated. "My brother, Jamie. He's older than Evan, but he doesn't speak much either. We built a way to talk that wasn't about words. I guess I never stopped using it." He studied her, the honesty in her voice. "Your family, my mother passed. It's just him and me now." She shrugged, light but not careless. "He works at a nursery. Plants listen better than people." Lucas chuckled, then caught himself. "I'm sorry. Don't be." "He's happy." That's enough. They fell quiet again. The air between them shifted, less like a transaction and more like trust beginning to form. Evan turned suddenly and touched more, then outside, then stay, a sequence that made Lucas's heart stumble. "He wants to come back," Mara whispered. Lucas nodded slowly. "Then he will." The next day, headlines painted Lucas as something new, the reclusive millionaire seen dining with son after years of isolation. Cameras found meaning where there was only mercy. Sloane's publicist called twice. He didn't answer. Instead, he drove back to Linden and Pine unannounced, Evan in the back seat with his headphones and grid. Dorian nearly tripped when they walked in. "Mr. Harrow, we weren't expecting—" "Good," Lucas said. "Then you won't have time to rehearse." He looked for Mara, found her at the corner tying her apron, calm as the tide. "Coffee?" she asked. He smiled. 2 cups. Evan climbed into the same window seat as before. The laminated grid spread like a map of safety. Mara placed a small vase with a single lavender stem beside him. He reached for it, brushed the petals, and pressed OK. Then blueberry. "You've created a ritual," she said. "He creates it," Lucas corrected. "I'm just invited." She laughed softly. "That's progress." Dorian approached, forced smile in place. "Mr. Harrow, we're honored to—" Lucas cut him off. "How much do you pay her?" Dorian blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. She's hourly." "Double it," Lucas said. "And put it in writing." Mara's eyes widened. "That's not necessary." "It is," Lucas said. "People should be compensated for what others can't replicate." Dorian nodded too fast. "Of course, Mr. Harrow." When he left, Mara looked at Lucas. "You can't buy gratitude." "I'm not," he said. "I'm buying time. So you don't have to pick between helping my son and paying your rent." Her lips parted, protest forming, but she saw the sincerity beneath his guarded tone. "All right," she said finally. "But only if you let me teach you too." "Teach me what?" "How to listen like he does." Over the next weeks, the lessons continued. Lucas arrived at the restaurant before opening. Mara would meet him with coffee and a handful of new icons. Together, they learned the language of pauses, the rhythm of quiet trust. Evan began choosing window every time. But now he'd add music down, okay, then sometimes hello, always with a look toward Mara, as if to check she still existed. He'd begun to hum when he lined up the cards, low and tuneless, yet deliberate. Mara noticed Lucas trying not to cry the first time it happened. "He's happy," she whispered. "He's free," Lucas said. But outside, the world noticed too. A journalist had followed them once, snapping photos through the glass. Mara's hand on Evan's shoulder, Lucas smiling in the background. The next day's headline twisted it into a spectacle. "Billionaire's mysterious waitress transforms his son." The article didn't mention Evan's name. It didn't need to. The comments did the rest. When Mara arrived for her shift that evening, her locker was plastered with printouts of the story. Dorian pretended ignorance. "Publicity helps the restaurant," he said. "Just be polite if people ask." But by noon, a reporter had called her cell. By 3, strangers were outside the restaurant with cameras, and by 5, Mara received a call from Lucas. His voice was rough. "They found out where you live." Her heart stopped. "What?" "Stay inside tonight," he said. "Please, I'll handle it." "Handle what?" "The cost of being decent in a world that punishes it," he said quietly. She didn't ask what that meant. She could hear in his tone that he was no longer the man who used money to erase consequences. He was the man finally willing to face them. When the evening fell, she heard a car stop outside her building. Lucas stood there, rain dripping from his coat, holding the same umbrella from the night they met. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should the people taking pictures," he replied. "But they are. So I came to make sure you're safe." Inside her small apartment, he looked around like a man studying another planet. A stack of unpaid bills on the counter, a kettle humming softly, a photo of Mara and Jamie smiling into the wind. "You built something real here," he said quietly. "It's alive," she folded her arms. "It's small, Mr. Harrow, that's the point." He smiled, faint but warm. "Lucas," he corrected. "Lucas," she echoed. The name felt different in her mouth, less like a title, more like a truth. Outside, flashes popped through the rain-streaked window. She turned off the lights. For a moment, the room was just the sound of rain and breathing. "You should go," she whispered. He didn't move. "I will," he said. "But tomorrow we fight back. Not with silence. With story," she frowned. "What story?" "The real one," he said. "The one where kindness isn't scandal." He stepped into the doorway, the umbrella catching the reflection of the streetlight. "And if they ask why a billionaire keeps sitting at a waitress's table," he said, "I'll tell them it's because she taught his son how to speak, and him how to listen." Then he left, vanishing into the rain, leaving only the echo of that truth behind. By morning, the story had already turned into something else. Headlines no longer said waitress. They said mystery woman, possible companion, scandal at Linden and Pine. The internet did what it always did, turned kindness into speculation, empathy into entertainment. Mara turned off her phone, but the noise lived inside her skull anyway. Dorian was already waiting when she entered the restaurant, clutching a newspaper as if it were evidence of her crimes. "Do you realize what you've done?" he hissed. "We have paparazzi outside. Investors are calling. Lucas Harrow's name is in every feed." She untied her apron and set it on the counter. "Then fire me," he blinked. "What?" "If my job is to make rich people comfortable, I'm not good at it," she said calmly. "But if my job is to make people feel human, I'm excellent." "Mara, fire me," she repeated. He didn't. Because deep down, Dorian knew the story was good for business. It wasn't morality that ruled him, it was momentum. And right now, the world's eyes were on his restaurant. Meanwhile, across town, Lucas stood in front of a wall of microphones. He hadn't planned this press conference. It had been his PR director's desperate attempt at damage control. But when he looked out at the rows of cameras, at the vultures dressed as reporters, something inside him snapped. "You've written about my son as if he's a product," he said, voice low, steady. "You've called his silence a defect and my choice is a spectacle. So let's be clear. Evan doesn't owe you words, and Mara Delaney doesn't owe you explanations." The murmurs rose, questions flew, but he lifted a hand and the room went still. "My son spoke for the first time because someone listened without agenda. That's not a scandal, it's grace." Someone shouted from the back, "Are you romantically involved with her?" He met the reporter's eyes. "You want a headline? Here it is. A waitress showed a billionaire how to be a father. Print that." The cameras flashed like lightning, and for the first time in years, Lucas didn't flinch. When the footage aired, Mara saw it through the window of a bakery, her reflection caught between loaves of bread and a television screen. Lucas looked changed, softer but stronger. Not the man who commanded silence through fear, but one who had earned it through truth. She whispered to herself, "You idiot." Half in awe, half in fear, that evening, the paparazzi didn't follow her home. The internet, in its restless hunger, had moved on to another story. But for Mara, nothing felt settled. She was proud, yes, but also terrified. Lucas Harrow had set the world on fire to defend her, and fire had a way of consuming everything in reach. So when he appeared again 2 days later at the cafe near her apartment, no bodyguards, no entourage, she didn't run. She poured 2 coffees and said, "You realize that was career suicide?" He smiled faintly. "Careers can be rebuilt. People can't." "Still," she said, sitting across from him. "You just told the entire world that a waitress changed your life." He stirred his coffee. "That wasn't the truth." "No." He met her gaze, unflinching. "You changed more than that." Mara's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas!" He leaned forward. "You made me see that love isn't pity, and help isn't weakness. You gave me back my son." She looked away, the weight of his sincerity too heavy to hold. "Don't make this something it isn't," she said softly. "You're grieving the years you lost with him. That's not love, it's awakening." He shook his head. "Maybe awakening is love." The cafe fell quiet around them. The sound of the city dulled into something distant, as if the world itself had leaned in to listen. For a moment it was only them, and the truth hanging unspoken between them. That afternoon, Evan refused to eat. The therapist said regression was normal, but Lucas saw it differently. His son wasn't withdrawing. He was waiting. When Mara arrived later that day, invited quietly by Bridget, Evan perked up. His fingers moved toward the picture grid instinctively. More. Outside. They walked to the small garden behind the house. The wind hummed softly through the bamboo fence. Evan crouched by the soil and touched a small lavender sprig, the same kind Mara had placed by his plate that first morning. He looked up at her, eyes bright, and pressed OK. Lucas watched, heart full and breaking. "He remembers." "Of course he does," she said. "He remembers what feels safe." Evan lined pebbles in a circle, humming the same low tune he'd made in the restaurant. Then, with sudden certainty, he picked a smooth stone and pressed it into Mara's hand. "For you," Lucas said quietly. "That's how he says thank you." She turned the stone over in her palm. It was simple, gray, unremarkable, except that it was everything. "Tell him I said thank you too." Lucas knelt beside his son, repeated the words, and Evan smiled. Not big, not exaggerated, but real. The kind of smile that could rebuild a man's faith in small miracles. As the sun dipped low, Mara stood to leave. "You should stay with him," she said. He needs you. He needs both of us, Lucas replied. I can't do this alone. You don't have to, she said. But you can't depend on me either. He's your son, Lucas. You're the bridge now. He nodded slowly, understanding that she was setting a boundary, not a wall. Will you come back? She hesitated. If he asks. Lucas looked toward Evan, who was now arranging the picture cards in a neat row. Then the boy pressed stay. Mara froze. The air thickened with meaning. Evan pressed it again, then looked up, eyes shimmering like the surface of the sea. Lucas smiled, tears forming. That's your answer. Mara crouched, meeting Evan's gaze. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay a little longer. And as the boy leaned forward and rested his head against her shoulder, the last light of day slipped through the trees, gold and gentle, like forgiveness. Lucas stood behind them, hands in his pockets, the expression on his face not that of a man who had everything, but of one who had finally learned what enough felt like. But as he looked toward the gate, a shadow lingered near the street, a camera lens peeking through leaves. The world, it seemed, wasn't done watching. The flash of the camera cut through the dusk like lightning, brief, invasive, cruel. Lucas saw it from the garden gate, but by the time he reached the fence, the figure had vanished. The sound of a car door slamming echoed down the street, leaving behind only silence and suspicion. Inside, Mara was tucking the picture grid back into its sleeve, while Evan arranged his stones in careful circles. Lucas didn't tell her what he'd seen, not yet. The boy's calm felt too rare, too fragile to shatter with fear. Later that night, after Mara had gone, Lucas sat by his office window, watching the sea dissolve into darkness. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You can hide your scandals behind charity, but not behind a child. The truth will surface. He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. But the words stayed, glowing behind his eyes. The next morning, reporters waited outside his gate. He ignored them. Inside the house, the world was smaller, safer. Bridget brewed tea while Evan hummed softly, tapping the rhythm of his quiet language. Yet Lucas couldn't shake the sense that something was about to break. By noon, the first article appeared online. Sources claim waitress Mara Delaney has been paid to coach Harrow's autistic son to improve public image before upcoming foundation launch. The story spread in minutes. Pictures from the garden taken through the fence were already circulating. Lucas slammed his laptop shut. Every instinct told him to fight, to call his lawyers, to issue statements. But he knew the cost of anger. Rage had built his empire, and it had nearly destroyed his soul. This time he needed something different. He drove straight to Linden and Pine. Mara was already there, her expression unreadable, the glow of her phone screen reflecting in her eyes. You saw it, she said quietly before he spoke. I'll fix it. You can't. I can, he insisted. I'll call every outlet, every editor. That's not fixing it, Lucas. That's fighting fire with gasoline. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing between tables still empty from the lunch rush. They're turning you into a villain to protect me. I don't care what they call me, she said. But Evan, he'll feel this. The noise, the tension, the way you'll start talking to lawyers instead of listening to him. That's what hurts him. He stopped. The truth hit like cold water. Then what do I do? Tell the truth, she said simply. Not through them. Through you, he frowned. You think anyone believes billionaires anymore? They believe fathers, she said. If they can see them. That night, Lucas sat in the dark with his laptop open, not to write a statement, but a letter. He wrote slowly, every word like stitching over an old wound. My son isn't a story. He's a child who found a voice because someone listened. I won't let the world twist that into marketing. When he finished, he didn't send it to the press. He uploaded it directly to the Foundation's website, under his own name. No filters, no edits, just truth. By morning, it had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. People weren't mocking him this time. They were defending him. Parents wrote messages of gratitude. Educators shared the story as hope. And beneath it all, one photo stood out. Evan smiling faintly beside the small lavender plant, the grid of icons resting between his hands. But fame is a tide. It gives and takes. The same attention that brought sympathy also brought scrutiny. Paparazzi camped outside the restaurant. Dorian finally cracked. He stormed into the dining room mid-shift, voice sharp with fear. They're saying you're exploiting him for sympathy, Mara. That you leaked the photo. She froze, holding a tray of coffee cups. "You know I didn't, do I?" His tone cracked under pressure. "You're the only one who's been near him." Before she could answer, Lucas appeared in the doorway. "Enough," Dorian turned, startled. "Mr. Harrow, She's under my protection," Lucas said, his voice calm, deadly quiet. "If you ever accuse her again without proof, I'll buy this restaurant just to shut you up." Dorian's mouth opened, then closed again. He stepped back, stammering apologies. Mara exhaled shakily. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Lucas said, "I did." The moment hung between them, charged, heavy. Then she whispered, "You can't keep saving me, Lucas. You'll make them right." His eyes softened. "I'm not saving you. I'm standing beside you. There's a difference." He left the restaurant that evening with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Not power, purpose. He'd spent his life controlling the narrative, but now he understood that truth didn't need control. It just needed courage. 2 nights later, Mara was walking home when she noticed a black car idling at the corner of her street. She slowed. The window rolled down. Sloan, the last person she expected to see. "Get in," Sloan said, voice smooth as glass. Mara hesitated. "Why?" "Because we both care about the same man," Sloan said, eyes glinting. "And he's about to lose everything if you don't listen." Mara's pulse quickened. She didn't move. "You expect me to believe you're here to help?" Sloan smiled faintly. "Believe what you want. But there's something you don't know about his company, about how deep the money behind all this goes. Someone is using Evan's story to destroy him." "Who?" Sloan's lips curved into a strange, weary smile. "That's what you need to find out, before it's too late." The car door unlocked with a soft click. Mara didn't get in. But as the car pulled away, the unease stayed, curling in her chest like smoke. Later that night, Lucas called. His voice was quiet, strained. "They froze one of my accounts. Someone's building a case I don't understand." She closed her eyes. "Then maybe it's time we both stop reacting and start investigating." He paused. "We?" "Yes, Lucas, we. You've spent your life surrounded by people who obey you. Maybe it's time to have someone who challenges you." He laughed softly. "You already do." "Then let's find out who's behind this," she said. For the first time, she wasn't just the waitress who changed his son's life. She was the woman who might save his name. And somewhere deep inside, beneath fear and chaos, Lucas Harrow began to realize that what bound them together wasn't charity, or guilt, or even fate. It was trust. The kind that could turn love into truth, and truth into something that might just survive the world. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and quiet planning. Lucas barely slept. He spent hours in his study, surrounded by folders and old contracts, chasing numbers that no longer made sense. Someone had manipulated his company's ledgers, reactivated dormant accounts, and linked them to shell charities under his name. It was elegant, precise, and malicious. It was the kind of sabotage that could only come from someone who once knew his world intimately. Mara arrived each morning with coffee and the kind of steadiness that kept him anchored. She didn't ask for permission to help. She simply sat beside him, sorting through papers, reading the fine print with patient precision. Evan often stayed nearby, arranging his cards on the rug, building silent stories out of small symbols. Sometimes he would hum while they worked, and the sound, soft, fragile, perfectly out of place, was the only thing keeping Lucas from drowning in anger. By the end of the week, they had found the first thread. A transaction from one of Lucas's dormant foundations, $10 million redirected to an offshore account. The authorizing signature his own, except it wasn't. It had been digitally forged. Mara frowned at the screen. Who still has access to these servers? Almost no one, Lucas said. Just a few senior executives. And Sloan years ago when she was handling PR. Mara leaned back in her chair, thinking. Then she wasn't warning me that night. She was warning you. Lucas stared at her. You think she's on our side? I think she's guilty of many things, Mara said quietly. But not this. She's too proud to hide behind anonymous sabotage. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Sloan's arrogance was almost a form of honesty. If she wanted to ruin him, she would have done it in daylight. Evan stood suddenly holding one of his cards. It was the word danger. He placed it on the desk between them. Lucas froze. You think he understands what's happening? I think he feels everything you don't say, Mara replied. Children like Evan, they see what we miss. They read silence the way others read faces. Lucas looked at his son and felt something twist in his chest, a mix of pride and shame. He shouldn't have to carry that. He doesn't, she said gently. You're just finally noticing that he's been trying to protect you. The weight of her words lingered in the air. Later that afternoon, Lucas received a call from an old colleague, Simon Ward, the company's former CFO. His voice was nervous, his tone rehearsed. Lucas, I can't talk long, but someone inside is selling data. They're setting you up for financial fraud. They want to destroy your credibility before the charity board elections next quarter. Who? Lucas demanded. The line went silent for a beat. You won't believe me. It's your chairman. He's leaking everything to the press. The call cut before Lucas could respond. The name echoed in his head like a verdict. Alan Graves, the man who had stood beside him for 15 years, through launches and losses, through every deal that built the Harrow empire. When Mara saw his face, she knew. It's someone close, he nodded slowly. Too close. That night, Lucas drove out to the cliffs by the water, where the wind tore through the silence like truth itself. Mara went with him, uninvited but expected. They stood at the edge of the world, the city behind them, the waves restless below. He spoke quietly. Graves was like family. He helped me build everything I have. He's the godfather to my son. Then he knows exactly how to hurt you, she said. Lucas turned to her. Do you ever regret getting involved with us? She met his gaze. No, but I regret that the world makes kindness dangerous. The sea roared between them, wild and cold. He wanted to say something that mattered, but the words caught behind the wall he'd spent a lifetime building. She saw it, and for once she didn't push. She just stepped closer, close enough for her presence to replace the words he couldn't form. In the distance, headlights cut through the fog. A car slowed near the cliff road. Lucas's muscles tensed. Sloane stepped out. The wind tore at her coat, but her eyes burned with focus. You found it, she said. The offshore account. How do you know about that? Lucas asked. Because I created it, she said flatly, years ago, as a backup channel for campaign funds. Graves found it in the archives and forged your signature to move the money. Mara's pulse quickened. Then help us prove it. Sloane hesitated. You think anyone will believe me? I'm the ex-fiancé who used to spin his headlines. Lucas took a step forward. Then give me the evidence. I'll make them believe you. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. Everything's on here. Transactions, emails, access logs. But you didn't hear it from me. They're watching everyone connected to you. She turned to go, then stopped, her voice quieter. Be careful with her, she said, nodding toward Mara. They'll use her to reach you. Then she was gone, swallowed by the fog. Lucas held the drive in his hand, as if it were a live wire. She's right, he said. If this goes wrong, they'll come after you too. Mara met his eyes. I knew that the moment I stayed. He looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see her as the waitress who had changed his son's life. He saw her as an equal, someone who carried his fight, not his shadow. They drove back in silence, headlights slicing through the darkness. Evan was already asleep when they returned home, curled up with his cards beside him. Lucas stood at the doorway for a long time, watching him breathe. I'll fix this, he whispered. Behind him, Mara's voice was soft but firm. No, Lucas, we will. He turned to her, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that whatever came next would bind them deeper than fear, deeper than reputation. The world had taken everything from both of them at different times. But now, standing in that quiet house, with one flash drive and one fragile boy who had taught them how to listen, they finally had something worth protecting. And for the first time in his life, Lucas Harrow understood that love wasn't about possession or power. It was about presence, the courage to stand beside someone when the world starts to break. The next morning began with the sound of rain and an unfamiliar quiet. Lucas woke before dawn, the flash drive still on his desk, waiting like a loaded truth. He hadn't slept much. Every few hours he would check the window, expecting headlights in the driveway, the knock of inevitability. Instead, there was only the storm. Mara arrived with her hair damp and her resolve sharper than ever. She didn't bother with pleasantries. You said Graves runs the foundation's accounts, right? Lucas nodded. He signs off on every major transaction. then he's the only one who can bury you cleanly. The same access that can forge your signature can erase his own trail. She took the flash drive, connected it to her laptop, and began opening the files. The screen glowed against the dim light, full of timestamps, transfer records, and archived emails. The data painted a quiet betrayal. Money rerouted through charities meant for children with disabilities, redirected to offshore accounts under ghost companies. Each one signed in Lucas's name. Mara's eyes moved fast, scanning for patterns. These transfers, they started right after you announced Evan's Therapy Foundation. The timing isn't coincidence. Graves used your son's name as cover. Lucas's jaw tightened. He used Evan. She met his eyes. He used what Evan means to you. That broke something in him. For years, Lucas had believed his empire was built on logic and control. But beneath all the structure had always been one soft truth. Everything he did was to give his son a life that didn't hurt. And now that same devotion had been twisted into evidence of guilt. Mara placed a hand on his arm. Then let's untwist it. He didn't speak for a long time. The storm outside built rhythm against the windows, like time insisting on its own heartbeat. Finally, he said, "We take this to the board tomorrow. But if we fail, we won't," she interrupted, "because this time you're not facing them alone." That night, Mara stayed for dinner. Not as a guest, not as help, simply because Evan had asked. He'd pressed stay twice, then slid the OK card toward her, a small smile ghosting across his face. Lucas cooked badly, but the gesture mattered more than the flavor. The three of them sat at the table, rain outside, lavender on the windowsill, warmth where there used to be absence. Evan lined up his cards beside his plate and tapped each one softly before eating, his way of making the world predictable. "He's calmer," Mara said quietly. "He trusts you now." Lucas looked at his son, the boy who once lived behind walls of silence. "He trusts you. Maybe both of us," she said. That's what safety looks like, shared. For a while they didn't talk. The world shrank to the sound of forks against plates, the storm fading into a whisper. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. When Mara rose to leave, Lucas walked her to the door. She hesitated before stepping into the rain. "Tomorrow will be hard," she said. "They'll attack your integrity, maybe even question your fitness as a father." "I've already failed worse," he said. She looked at him, her expression soft but steady. "You haven't failed. You've changed." He smiled faintly. "That's worse for men like me." "Then keep doing it," she said. "It scares the right people." And then she left, vanishing into the rain again, this time by choice. The board meeting was held in the glass tower downtown. The air inside was too cold, the kind of chill that felt intentional. Graves sat at the head of the table, immaculate in his gray suit, the picture of moral authority. "Lucas," he began smoothly, "we've reviewed the financial discrepancies. You must understand the board's position. Until your name is cleared, the Foundation's control must transfer temporarily to you," Lucas said. Graves didn't blink. "It's procedure." Mara stood behind Lucas's chair, silent but unflinching. "Procedure doesn't usually involve fabricating authorization codes," she said. Graves turned to her, a small rehearsed smile curving his mouth. "And you are?" "Mara Delaney. I was there when your fraudulent transfers were traced back." One of the board members murmured something. Graves's jaw twitched just slightly. Lucas slid the flash drive across the table. "That contains a full record of every transaction linked to my signature, including the IP address used to forge them." Graves didn't touch it. "Anyone could have—" "Yours?" Mara interrupted, calm and lethal. "It's your IP. The address traces back to the Foundation office in your name." The room fell still. Graves tried to recover, but Lucas spoke first. "You used my son's name to launder money, to the same causes you claim to protect. You took what made us human and turned it into profit." Graves's composure cracked. "You think they'll believe her?" "A waitress." Lucas smiled coldly. "They will when they see the audit logs you forgot to delete." A ripple went through the boardroom. Someone stood to call security. Graves's confidence drained as if pulled from the room. He looked at Lucas, not with guilt, but with bitterness. "You think this makes you a hero? You still built this empire on lies." "I just learned from you," Lucas didn't reply. He didn't need to. The guards entered moments later, quiet and efficient. Graves didn't resist as they led him away. When the door closed, the chairman's seat remained empty. The board shifted in their chairs, avoiding Lucas's eyes. Finally, one woman spoke. "You'll need to issue a statement. The press will be relentless," Lucas nodded. "I know, but this time I'll write it myself." He stood, placed a hand on Mara's shoulder, and walked out without another word. Outside, the city was alive again. No cameras, no chaos. Just wind and sun over the glass towers. Lucas looked up at the sky and exhaled, a sound half relief, half exhaustion. Mara stood beside him, eyes following the light breaking through the clouds. "It's over," she said. He shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." Back at home, Evan sat on the floor building a tower out of stones and cards. When Lucas entered, the boy looked up, his expression unreadable but calm. He pressed OK, then stay. Then a new card Mara had added that week, safe. Lucas knelt beside him, his throat tightening. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "We're safe." Mara watched from the doorway, her eyes misted with something deeper than triumph. It wasn't victory they'd found, it was balance. The kind that came from surviving the storm without losing what mattered most. That night, Lucas didn't return to the office. He sat by the window while Evan slept, listening to the quiet. Mara brewed tea in the kitchen, moving with the ease of someone who belonged. When she handed him the cup, their hands brushed. A simple touch, nothing more, yet everything. "Thank you," he said, meaning far more than the tea. She smiled. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Lucas." "I do," he said, "because before you, silence was just empty. Now it means peace." Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, for the first time, peace stayed. Lucas woke to sunlight for the first time in months, though it took him a moment to remember what peace felt like. The foundation scandal had ended, Graves had been arrested, and Sloane's name had disappeared quietly from the news. But for all the noise that had surrounded him, the house was silent again. Silent in a way that no longer hurt. Evan sat by the kitchen window, building lines of pebbles along the sill. Each pebble had a word drawn in marker, his new way of speaking through touch and order. Safe, blue, more, stay. Mara watched him from across the counter, her hair loose, her voice soft as she told him stories he didn't have to answer to enjoy. It was the kind of morning Lucas had never believed he could have. Ordinary, human, fragile, real. The calm didn't last. Late that afternoon, Lucas received a letter sealed in plain white. No logo, no sender. Just his name in black ink. He opened it at the dining table while Evan played with his cards. Inside was a single sentence typed in block letters. "We know it wasn't only Graves." Look deeper. Beneath the words, a symbol, 3 intersecting rings. It wasn't anything Lucas recognized, but it was enough to unearth the unease he'd been trying to bury. He turned the letter over, scanning for hidden meaning, then looked toward Mara. "Someone else was involved," he said. She read the letter and frowned. "Do you think Sloane—" "No," Lucas interrupted. "Not her. This is something else." They spent the next days searching for the symbol. It wasn't tied to any corporation or charity, but Mara finally found it on an old document stored in the digital archives, the emblem of the investment group that had financed Harrow Innovations when Lucas first started. It was his origin, his foundation, the people who had given him his first million, when all he had was code and ambition. It was also the one part of his empire he had never questioned. That night he called an old partner, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Who still uses the tri-ring mark?" he asked. There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end spoke quietly. "No one uses it, Lucas, because it was never a group, it was one man, a silent backer. He vanished after your IPO. Name," Lucas said. The voice hesitated. "Harlan Rowe." The name landed like a ghost. Rowe had been a legend in private finance, known for building fortunes from shadows and destroying them the same way. Lucas had met him once, a handshake in a boardroom 15 years ago, and had never heard from him again. Until now, when Mara heard the name, she closed her eyes, thinking. "He's testing you," she said. "Seeing if you'll stay quiet again." Lucas shook his head. "Not this time." He stared at the letter again. "If Rowe's behind this, it means the corruption started with me. I built something on someone else's dirt." "Then clean it," she said. "Not with press releases or statements, with truth." The next morning, Lucas made an appointment with the federal auditors. He brought every document, every drive, every piece of evidence that could either destroy or free him. It wasn't about saving his name anymore. It was about clearing the foundation for Evan, so that the boy would never inherit the burden of his father's lies. When he finished the statement, the agent asked him, "You understand this could ruin you financially?" Lucas nodded. "If that's what honesty costs, I can afford it." When he came home that night, Mara was sitting on the porch steps barefoot, her eyes on the sea. She didn't ask what he had said to the authorities. She didn't need to. She could see it in his posture, in the quiet gravity of a man who had stopped running. "You did it," she said. He nodded. "I told them everything." She smiled faintly. "Then whatever happens now, it's clean." Inside, Evan was asleep on the couch, his cards scattered across the blanket. Lucas picked one up. It was the safe card, the edges worn from use. He looked down at his son and felt something rise in his chest that wasn't pride, wasn't relief, something deeper. Redemption maybe, or grace. He turned to Mara. "Do you ever wonder why you walked into that restaurant that night?" She tilted her head. "Maybe the same reason you asked a stranger what water tasted like. You were thirsty and I was tired of pretending I wasn't." He laughed softly, the sound rough with emotion. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I'm staying because I want to." The rain began again outside, light and cleansing. Lucas took her hand, the gesture small but full of everything unspoken. "You know, before you I thought wealth was control," he said. "Now I know it's freedom. Not to own the world, but to choose what matters." "And what matters?" she asked. He looked toward his son. "This, all of it." For the first time, his words carried no performance, no strategy, just truth. And in that truth, Mara saw the man behind the fortune, the father, the human being she had somehow fallen in love with. Neither of them said it out loud, but it was there, in the stillness between breaths. The kind of love that doesn't announce itself, it just exists. That night, as the house went quiet again, Lucas walked through the hallway and stopped by Evan's door. The boy stirred in his sleep and reached for one of his cards. His fingers found stay, and he pressed it to his chest before drifting back into dreams. Lucas smiled and whispered to the dark, "I will." In another room, Mara sat by the window watching the sea fade into mist. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether Roe would strike again, whether the world would forgive Lucas, but she knew one thing with certainty. Peace was no longer a luxury. It was a choice. And for the first time, they had all chosen it together. Days turned into weeks and peace began to take root in the Harrow home, like something shy but determined. The newspapers had moved on. The paparazzi had vanished, and the name Lucas Harrow had stopped trending. The world had found a new scandal to feed on, leaving him finally invisible in the best way possible. For Lucas, invisibility meant freedom. He spent his mornings walking Evan to the coastal park, where the boy would sit near the water and line up seashells according to size and sound. Every now and then he would hum, soft, almost melodic. Mara said it was how he mapped happiness. She had moved into the small guest house by the garden, not out of obligation, but because leaving no longer made sense. Her presence had become part of the rhythm of the house, the scent of coffee before sunrise, the quiet hum of her voice as she read to Evan in the evenings, the calm she brought to every corner she entered. Lucas often found himself standing in the doorway, just watching. He didn't know if what he felt was love or something rarer, respect so profound it softened the air. But one morning the illusion of calm cracked. A letter arrived addressed to Mara. The envelope was plain, the handwriting too neat. She opened it at the breakfast table, her expression tightening as she read. Lucas looked up from his coffee. "What is it?" She folded the paper, her jaw tense. "It's from Roe." He froze. "He reached out to you." "He says he wants to meet," she replied. "Alone." Lucas stood instantly alert. "That's not happening." She looked at him evenly. "He won't talk to you. He thinks I'm your weakness." "You're not," he said sharply. "You're the reason I'm still standing." "Exactly," she said softly. "That's why he'll talk to me. He knows I'm not for sale." Lucas wanted to refuse, to forbid it outright, but he stopped himself. The woman standing before him wasn't someone he could protect like property. She was someone he had to trust like truth. "Then I'm going with you," he said. "No," her voice was calm, final. "He'll only speak if I'm alone, but I'll keep my phone on, I promise." The meeting was set for dusk at the old observatory overlooking the cliffs. The drive there felt endless. The sky was bruised with color. the sea below restless. Mara parked near the edge and stepped into the fading light. Harlan Rowe was already there, leaning on a cane, his face sharp with age and intelligence. "You're braver than I expected," he said, his tone smooth. "Most people fear what they don't understand." Mara kept her distance. "I'm not here for games." He smiled faintly. "You think you saved him, don't you? The great Lucas Harrow. You think you pulled him from the dark. He saved himself," she said. "I just reminded him where the light was." Rose studied her, eyes narrowing. "He's still naive. He thinks the system he exposed will stop, because he confessed. But truth doesn't end corruption, it attracts it." "Then why warn us?" she asked. "Because he built his empire with my money," Rose said coldly. "And every dollar tied to my name will eventually destroy him, unless someone cuts the last thread." Mara folded her arms. "Then cut it." "I can't," he said. "Not without his consent. The contracts are old. They bind him to me in ways that can't be erased publicly without causing collapse." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If he stays quiet, I'll disappear. If he doesn't, I'll burn it all, including you." Mara didn't flinch. "You think you can scare me with that?" Rose's eyes hardened. "I don't have to scare you. I just have to remind you that good men never survive long in my world." She took a breath, calm, deliberate. "Then maybe it's time someone showed your world what survival looks like when it's built on decency." She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist. For an instant, she thought she saw something behind his arrogance, fear maybe. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You can't fix men like me. You can only outlive us." She pulled her hand free. "Then watch me." When she returned home that night, Lucas was waiting outside, pacing. The moment he saw her car, he ran toward it. "Mara," he said, breathless. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but her voice trembled slightly. "He threatened you, all of us. But he also gave me the truth." She handed him a small flash drive. "His confession. Audio he didn't know I was recording." Lucas stared at it, disbelief flooding his face. "You, how?" "I told him he was right," she said. "That good men don't survive. Then I made him talk about how he ruins them. He took the drive like it was made of glass. If this is real, we can end him." "No," she said. "Not end him. End his hold on you." They sat together at the table as the storm gathered outside once again. Lucas played the file. Rose's voice filled the room, cold, steady, damning. Every sentence was a nail sealing the coffin of the Empire's corruption. By the time it ended, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand. "You risked everything for this." "So did you," she said. "That's what love is, isn't it?" He looked at her, the word hanging in the air between them like something sacred. "Love," he repeated softly, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Then, quieter, "Yes, I think it is." That night, while Evan slept and the storm rattled the glass, Lucas and Mara sat in the dark together, not as savior and saved, but as two people who had stopped pretending. The world owed them safety. What they had was fragile, but it was real, and it was enough. The next morning, Lucas walked into the boardroom of his own company for the last time. He placed the flash drive on the table and said, "This is the truth. Publish it. Dissolve everything tied to Rose's name. Let it burn clean." The board protested, but he didn't care. When he left, he didn't look back. Outside, the air smelled of salt and rain, and Mara was waiting by the car. "It's done," he said. She smiled, calm and proud. "Then you're free." He took her hand, and for the first time in his life, Lucas Harrow wasn't chasing redemption. He was living it. It was spring again when the world finally went quiet. The Harrow estate no longer echoed with footsteps of assistants or the hum of corporate calls. The board had dissolved the company. The foundations were handed to new leadership, and Lucas had walked away from the name that once made him untouchable. He sold the mansion overlooking the cliffs and moved into a modest seaside home where the walls smelled faintly of salt and cedar. The house wasn't grand, but it was his first honest home. Mara helped him unpack, laughing at how little he owned now that everything was gone. He had donated most of his belongings, suits, watches, things that once defined him. When she teased him about it, he smiled and said, "It's lighter this way." Evan adapted faster than anyone expected. Without the noise, he began to bloom. He started using more words, small and deliberate, each one a victory. Sometimes he'd run down the beach collecting shells, then line them up in spirals. One afternoon, he called out softly for the first time, "Dad." Lucas froze, every muscle trembling, and when he turned, Evan was standing there smiling, holding a small shell in his hand. "For you," he said. Lucas dropped to his knees, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I hear you, buddy. I always will." Mara watched from the porch, tears in her eyes, knowing that no amount of money could have ever bought that moment. As weeks passed, Lucas and Mara settled into a rhythm of quiet living. They opened a small art and learning space for children with communication challenges, something Evan had inspired. It wasn't flashy, but it was full of life. Walls covered in drawings, shelves stacked with stones and shells, music humming softly in the background. Lucas called it the Haven. People came not because of his name, but because of what it stood for, a place where silence was understood, not feared. One evening, as the sun began to fade behind the water, Mara sat with him on the porch steps. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The meetings, the power, the rush." He thought for a long time before answering. "I miss the illusion of control," he said. "But not what it cost me." She nodded. "You've changed more than you think." He smiled. "You're the one who changed me." She looked at him gently. "No, you were waiting to change. I just gave you permission." Evan's laughter carried from the sand below, where he was building something out of driftwood and stones. Lucas watched him, eyes soft. "He's happy," he said. "He's safe." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. That's all he ever needed. They stayed like that as the light dimmed, the world turning gold then blue, the sea whispering its endless rhythm. The air smelled of salt and warmth and something like hope. For Lucas, every sound, every silence felt like a second chance. He turned to Mara, his voice low. "When I first met you, I didn't know how to listen. I was surrounded by people who only spoke for what they wanted. You were the first who spoke for what mattered." She smiled softly. "I just told the truth." He reached for her hand. "Then that's all I ever needed." In the distance, Evan called again. "Mom, Dad, look." The word mom hung in the air, unplanned but effortless. Mara froze, breath caught between surprise and emotion. Lucas looked at her, eyes bright. "Did you hear that?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I did." They walked down to the shore together. Evan stood proudly beside a small sculpture, made of shells and sticks, shaped like three figures holding hands. "Us," he said. Lucas knelt beside him, voice breaking again. "It's perfect." Mara crouched too, pressing her forehead to Evan's. "You made us a family," she whispered. The three of them stayed there until the sky turned dark, waves brushing their feet, the world reduced to nothing but love and sound and the hum of belonging. For the first time, Lucas Harrow, the man who once thought wealth could buy peace, understood that the greatest fortune he'd ever earn was this: a son who spoke with honesty, a woman who loved without fear, and a life where silence finally meant home. When the tide began to rise, Lucas stood and looked out at the water. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked quietly. Mara took his hand, only to thank it for letting go. He nodded, breathing in the night air. "Then we're free." And as the stars began to appear above the dark horizon, Evan's small voice echoed once more, clear and sure. "Stay," he said. Lucas looked at Mara and smiled through tears. "Always."